Welcome to Echoes of the Past, where America's darkest secrets whisper back through time. Today's story will make you question medicine, memory, and the mysterious ties between the living and the dead. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and watch until the end, because this mystery is unlike anything you've ever heard. Now, let's begin. In the bitter winter of 1847, just beyond the shadow of Salem, Massachusetts, a young woman named Latoya was admitted to a small religious hospital known as Blessed Mercy Infirmary. This was no ordinary institution. It was run by strict Protestant ministers who believed healing the body required cleansing the soul. What unfolded during her 37 days there was so unsettling that nearly every official record was destroyed. Only one physician's private journal, hidden away in a family attic for over a century, kept the truth alive. The case was marked never to be spoken of again. Church leaders pressured the hospital into permanent silence. 3 of the 7 doctors who treated her fled the state within months, abandoning medicine altogether. For over 175 years, no one has heard the full account until now. If you have the courage to uncover the darkest secrets religious authorities tried to bury, hit subscribe. Tell us what state you're watching from, and prepare yourself. This channel, Echoes of the Past, is not for the faint-hearted. It's for those who dare to hear what others were too afraid to speak. It all began with what looked like a routine admission to a respected medical center that claimed to blend Christian mercy with cutting-edge science. The town of Millbrook, Massachusetts, 15 miles northwest of Salem, was a quiet place of church steeples and timber-framed houses, sheltering barely 800 people. In 1847, old Congregationalist families still dominated, while waves of Irish Catholic mill workers brought attention to the streets. Blessed Mercy Infirmary stood right in the middle of that divide. Built in 1834 by Reverend Ezekiel Whitmore, a stern minister convinced that saving the body meant saving the soul first. It was the largest hospital between Boston and the New Hampshire border. 20 beds, 7 Harvard-trained Protestant physicians, a daily schedule of prayer, scripture, and medical rounds. Every patient, no matter their faith, was expected to kneel and join in. Its chief physician, Dr. Jonathan Aldrich, had studied under famed alienist Dr. Samuel Woodward. At just 34, Aldrich combined a meticulous scientific mind with unshakable religious conviction. He believed mental illness was neither pure sign nor pure madness, but something that could be studied, understood, and treated, provided. One never separated medicine from God. The winter was brutally cold. Coal furnaces struggled to keep the brick building warm. Carbolic acid mixed with wood smoke filled the halls. Patients often described the air itself as heavy, oppressive, like breathing through a veil. And into that place, on January 15th, 1847, came Latoya. A farmer, Silas Hartwell, had discovered her unconscious in his barn 3 days earlier, wearing only a thin cotton dress in sub-freezing weather. She had no coat, No shoes, just a leather pouch with 7 silver coins and a brass locket with no markings. When she awoke, she spoke in a whisper. She remembered nothing about how she'd gotten there. Asked for her full name. She answered, Latoya, nothing more. Physically, she was fine. Normal vital signs. No frostbite, no malnutrition. But something about her unnerved the medical staff immediately. She spoke only when addressed, answered questions with eerie precision, and seemed acutely aware of things happening around her, as if she could sense the room before anyone moved. The moment her religious background was brought up, however, everything changed. Her hands trembled, her breathing grew ragged, and she began whispering in a strange tongue. At first, Dr. Aldrich thought it Latin, but Dr. Marcus Brennan, the youngest physician on staff and a scholar of classical languages, realized it was no Latin he'd ever seen. It's a blend, he wrote. Fragments of several languages, perhaps African or Caribbean, spoken with such fluency it must be her native speech. Yet, when questioned, she denies ever speaking anything but English. That very night, the nurses reported strange occurrences. Sister Mary Catherine, a Catholic nun permitted to work there despite local controversy, claimed Latoya seemed to know things before they happened, anticipating movements, finishing questions before they were asked. Whatever was happening inside, Bless Mercy Infirmary in that frozen winter of 1847. It was only the beginning, and what followed would shatter the faith of men who believed they had seen everything. She began to unsettle even the night staff. Latoya would sit upright moments before the watchman entered the ward, ask for water at the exact hour the well needed to be drawn, and wake seconds before the church bells struck, as if some invisible clock were wound inside her. Then came the whispers from the other patients. Zelina Hitchcock, a 50-year-old recovering from pneumonia, claimed that Latoya had spoken to her while asleep, recounting in unnerving detail the death of her husband 5 years earlier. Those details had never been shared with anyone. In Millbrook, when confronted, Latoya denied it all. She insisted she had never even spoken to Mrs. Hitchcock, Dr. Aldrich, a rational man by training and temperament, initially dismissed these stories as the imaginings of fevered minds. But his skepticism cracked on the night of January 18th. During his rounds, he found Latoya sitting straight in bed, eyes closed, chanting in the same unknown language she had spoken during her admission. Her voice carried through the ward, steady, haunting. The patients around her stirred in their sleep, restless, some muttering as if caught in dreams they couldn't escape. One of them, Thomas Brewster, a young man laid up with a crushed leg, later confessed that while she spoke, visions filled his mind. A lush tropical landscape, strangers moving in circles around a roaring fire, rituals that felt ancient, forbidden, and heartbreakingly familiar, though he had never seen such things. When Latoya's voice fell silent and her eyes opened, tears ran down his face. Though he couldn't explain why, Dr. Aldrich wrote that night's observations into his private journal. The patient displays no ordinary hysteria, nor the melancholia I've studied before. Yet her presence exerts an influence on others that science, in its current form, cannot hope to explain. I stand divided, 1 foot in medicine, one in a realm I have been taught does not exist. Soon the infirmary itself seemed to bend to her moods. Nurses noticed that their routines ran smoother when Latoya was calm, yet became tangled and chaotic whenever she grew agitated. The coal furnaces, which had failed all winter, suddenly held their heat. Even the rats, a constant plague in the old building, vanished within her first week. Reverend Ezekiel Whitmore, who came twice a week to offer scripture and prayer, eventually asked to meet her. On January 20th, he spent nearly an hour in the hospital's small chapel speaking with the young woman. Witnesses said he left pale, shaken, clutching his prayer book with trembling hands. When Dr. Aldrich pressed him for details, Whitmore answered only, "That girl knows things no Christian soul should know. We stand at the edge of something no surgeon's scalpel nor priest's sermon can cut away. God alone may hold the key." The Reverend's warning would soon prove more than piety. Within days, the Blessed Mercy Infirmary would become the stage for events that tested not just faith, but sanity itself. At first, the changes were subtle. Patients long confined to their beds recovered with sudden, inexplicable speed when moved near Latoya's cot. Others, unsettled by her presence, declined in direct proportion to their fear. Meanwhile, Dr. Marcus Brennan, the youngest physician on staff, and the one most obsessed with her strange speech, spent his nights poring through archives at the Salem Historical Society. There, among salt-stained shipping records, he found mention of a vessel called the Esperanza, a slave ship wrecked off the Massachusetts coast in 1823. Among its survivors, one name stood out, a little girl described as speaking in tongues, unknown to Christian ears, carrying healing knowledge that frightened those around her. The ship's manifest listed her as Latoya, approximately 4 years old, according to brittle church papers. She had been placed with a Presbyterian family in Peabody. 3 years later, she disappeared, leaving behind only a note written in the same indecipherable script Brennan had heard her speak, in a confidential letter to a Harvard colleague. Brennan wrote, "If our patient and that child are one and the same, the implications are staggering. She should be 28 by now, yet appears scarcely. And if she was raised by a family known for rigid Christian piety, how then did she inherit knowledge of rites and practices untouched by Western faith?" Dr. Aldrich scoffed at first. Coincidence, he told Brennan, until, during one of their daily sessions, he mentioned the shipwreck aloud. Latoya's reaction was immediate and devastating. Her calm exterior shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she gripped the brass locket at her chest and began to speak rapidly in the mysterious tongue, her voice breaking under the weight of memory. For the first time, she spoke willingly of her past, or what fragments bare she could bear. She spoke of a ship pitching violently in dark seas, the clatter of chains, the stench of death. voices calling names she still understood, but could no longer place. A house where strangers tried to wash away what she was, and a fleeing into woods where, as she put it, the old ways still lived. "I don't move through time like others," she whispered during one session. "Time moves through me. I have been young, I have been old, I have died, and I have been born. The walls between then and now are thin. Dr. Dinner than you want to believe." Aldrich recorded every word, though with a growing sense of dread. Perhaps, he reasoned, this was trauma, a fractured mind spinning stories to protect itself. And yet, her knowledge of events no one had told her, her strange influence on patients, and even the building itself, none of it fit the tidy frameworks of Victorian medicine. Something deeper, older, and far less safe was at work. The staff of Blessed Mercy Infirmary began to split into two very different camps. Some saw Latoya as a once-in-a-lifetime medical mystery, something to study carefully and document with precision. Others whispered that her presence had brought something unholy into their God-fearing institution. Even Sister Mary Catherine, whose Catholic upbringing accepted the reality of divine mysteries, found herself unsettled. In quiet confidence to Dr. Aldrich, she admitted, "I have seen prayer mend the sick. I have watched faith comfort the dying. But what radiates from this young woman is different. It feels ancient, not wicked, not pure, just old, older, Ben Scripture, older than the cross itself." The quiet tension finally broke when Mrs. Selina Hitchcock, the pneumonia patient who had dreamt of her late husband, made a request that stunned the ward. She begged to be moved into the bed, directly beside Latoya. "She doesn't just speak to me," Mrs. Hitchcock explained to Dr. Aldrich. "She brings my memories back to life. The sound of Samuel's laughter when joy truly reached him. The way he hummed while tending our garden. The words he spoke to me on the day we wed. She doesn't create dreams. She restores what was lost." Reluctantly, Dr. Aldrich approved the transfer. The effect was immediate and contagious. Other patients, hearing whispers of vivid dreams, sudden improvements, and a strange sense of peace, began requesting the same. The ward shifted. Some patients calmed. Others, however, suffered. Jacob Morrison, a merchant recovering from dysentery, became increasingly agitated whenever Latoya was near. His nights turned to torment, dreams of chains, screams, blood, and suffering he could not name. "She carries the sins of the past," he told Aldrich during a rare moment of clarity. "I see things I never lived, yet feel guilty for. I wake with the weight of crimes I didn't commit, but somehow they feel like mine." The hospital began to divide along invisible lines. Some staff avoided her wing altogether during offer. Others lingered there, drawn by something they could neither explain nor resist. Aldrich noticed a strange pattern. Younger nurses, with lighter ties to the church, seemed unaffected. Older staff, especially those deeply religious, grew anxious, restless, sometimes afraid. Matters escalated when Reverend Whitmore returned, not alone this time. but accompanied by two fellow ministers, Reverend Isaiah Blackwood of the First Baptist Church and Reverend Cornelius Marsh of the Methodist congregation. They requested a private meeting with Aldrich, calling it a matter of grave spiritual concern. Reverend Whitmore spoke first, his voice hushed but heavy. "We believe your patient engages, knowingly or not, in practices that are neither priest nor harmless. Families of the sick speak of dreams and visions not born of God's revelation. Whatever this is, it threatens more than flesh and bone." Dr. Aldrich felt the weight of two worlds pressing in. The ministers held sway over the hospital's future, yet his oath bound him to observe, not condemn. He had seen no evidence of malice in Latoya, only confusion, quiet sorrow, and an unexplainable influence that even she seemed to fear. A compromise was reached, one neither side truly trusted. The ministers would be allowed to observe her directly, while Aldrich continued his medical evaluation uninterrupted. What none of them foresaw was how that decision would change everything. The joint study began on February 1st, 1847. A careful protocol was established, every interaction recorded, every reaction noted, every word weighed. Reverend Blackwood, whose Baptist faith prized personal spiritual experience, was the first to notice what he called sacred synchronicities. Latoya would begin speaking in her strange tongue at the precise moment patients reached deep emotional crisis, moments no one had voiced aloud, and, somehow, without translation, her words soothed them. In his private journal, Blackwood confessed, "I have witnessed what appears to be spiritual empathy beyond any scriptural precedent. The young woman seems to draw in suffering and transform it. If this is of God, I cannot find its likeness in His Word. If it is not, then it is a mystery older than Eden." Meanwhile, Dr. Aldrich designed controlled sessions, quiet experiments disguised as ordinary visits. With Latoya's consent, patients were introduced to her one by one, while he watched unseen from behind a screen, recording every detail. The results refused to behave like science. One elderly farmer, Jeremiah Couch, 70 years old, suffering a cough no treatment had cured, sat with Latoya for only minutes before speaking openly of battles fought in the War of 1812. Moments he had never confessed to anyone. Not family, not priest, not doctor. The memory came alive in his mind as if freshly carved, unburied by her mere presence. And for the first time, the ministers, the physicians, and the nurses all began to share a single, silent thought. Whatever Latoya was, she had come to Millbrook carrying truths neither church nor science was prepared to hold. As Mr. Couch spoke, something remarkable happened. His hacking cough began to ease. By the end of his session with Latoya, he was breathing more easily than he had in months. Later, he tried to explain it to Dr. Aldrich. It wasn't just my lungs, she cleared. Dr. It felt like she pulled 30 years of sorrow out of me. I told her things about the war I've never told a soul, not even my wife. Somehow, saying it to her made it lighter to carry. But it was her meeting with young Timothy Wadsworth that would leave even the most skeptical among the staff in stunned silence. Timothy was 12, brought in by terrified parents who described violent fits, episodes in which their son spoke in voices that weren't his, recounting events from Millbrook's past that no child his age could know, believing him to be possessed. They had sought both medicine and prayer. The moment Latoya sat with the boy, the chaos ceased. His wild, erratic behavior stilled. Then, to the astonishment of everyone observing, Timothy began to speak in the same unrecognizable tongue Lat had used since her arrival. For nearly an hour the two conversed fluently, eyes calm, expressions solemn to souls ages apart, speaking as if they understood something the rest of the room did not. Dr. Aldrich, hidden behind the observation screen, took meticulous notes. The child spoke of events long buried in this town's history. He wrote. He named graves in the old cemetery that no church record acknowledges. He spoke of families long gone, of conflicts between settlers and the native tribes, of matters locked away in time, not as learned facts, but as if he had lived them himself. When their conversation ended, Timothy blinked, confused, and remembered none of it. But from that day forward, his so-called madness vanished. Within a week, his parents carried him home, their son whole again, to the ministers. This was confirmation of divine intervention. To Dr. Aldrich, it was a riddle without edges, a mystery that refused to sit still under the weight of logic. Meanwhile, Dr. Brennan's research in the Salem Historical Society turned up something even more unsettling. Among the yellowed papers of a long-deceased minister, Reverend Josiah Mather, he found a bundle of letters dated 1826. They spoke of a young woman living in the woods near Millbrook, a woman with heathen knowledge who speaks in tongues older than the Tower of Babel. She remembers the pain of her people, Mather wrote, not through stories, but as if she herself endured it. She heals with methods unknown to any Christian physician. I fear my attempts to save her soul have brought me face to face with truths that threaten to shake the very pillars of my faith. For 3 years, the Reverend corresponded with a colleague in Boston, describing his fruitless efforts to convert this woman he called only the child of many mothers. His final letter, written in December 1829, was brief and heavy with fear. I can go no further. She has shown me truths about suffering that no man should witness. I fear I have glimpsed the edges of a knowledge meant only for God. May He forgive me for abandoning her, but I cannot bridge the chasm between her world and ours. Brennan shared his findings with the others. The timeline fit. The disappearance from her Presbyterian caretakers, the wilderness years, the strange knowledge, the narrative, now stretched across decades without a single break. And then the hospital itself seemed to awaken. Nurse Margaret Thornton began to dream vividly of Millbrook's early days, details she had never studied, yet described with historical accuracy. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the hospital's oldest physician, reported remembering conversations with patients long dead their voices returning as if carried on the air around Latoya. Whispers spread like infection. Some staff avoided her ward completely, unwilling to be near her influence. Others drifted toward her, drawn by an unshakable sense of clarity, claiming they felt more attuned to their patients, more aware of the hidden pains behind their suffering. The hospital divided not just in belief but in practice. Daily routines grew tense. Quiet prayers replaced idle conversations. The old brick building had become a place where faith and reason no longer lived in separate rooms. They collided in the same breath. Dr. Aldrich found himself caught in the tide. He wrote in his journal with growing unease, "I fear the detachment I have cultivated as a physician is slipping away. In her presence, my memories sharpen. Forgotten moments from my childhood return to me with painful clarity. I see my patients not as collections of ailments, but as vessels of lineage, memory, and grief reaching far beyond their own lives. This makes me a better healer, but it also fractures the foundation upon which my understanding of consciousness rests." And then came the night that shifted. Everything. Mrs. Hitchcock, the pneumonia patient who had first asked to be placed beside Latoya, requested a private word with Dr. Aldrich. Her voice, weak but urgent, trembled with a weight she could barely hold. "Doctor," she whispered, "it isn't just Samuel she's shown me. It isn't just my past. It's this town, this hospital. There are things here, things you need to know, and she's shown me where to look. There are truths, buried here truths. People have literally died to keep hidden, and I think she knows where to find them." Mrs. Hitchcock's confession sent a jolt through the hospital's senior staff. Dr. Aldrich arranged a private meeting with the fading woman at once, and Reverend Whitmore insisted on being present to offer spiritual comfort. What they heard that cold February night would append everything they thought they knew about Latoya and about Millbrook itself. "She doesn't just recall the past," Mrs. Hitchcock said, her chest rising and falling with effort, yet her voice steady. She carries it like a weight that never leaves her. In their quiet conversations, Latoya had shown her glimpses of Millbrook's past, events long before any living soul was born. She described the very land beneath the Blessed Mercy Infirmary land that had once been a sacred burial site for the Pennock people. According to Latoya, tribal elders had held powerful ceremonies there, honoring not only their own ancestors, but also the restless spirits of those who had died in bondage. Enslaved men and women dragged to Massachusetts in the colony's early years. She spoke of bones under this building, Mrs. Hitchcock whispered. Not just native remains, but the forgotten dead, those who died in chains, denied Christian rites, laid to rest without names or prayers. She said their spirits have been calling for someone to remember them, to set the truth free. A shiver passed through Dr. Aldrich, one that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Old construction notes from 1834 had briefly mentioned strange burials uncovered during excavation. Those remains had been quietly relocated under Reverend Whitmore's orders to clear the ground for for the hospital's foundation. Now, as with face drained of color, Aldrich knew Latoya's revelations were not mere visions. But Mrs. Hitchcock wasn't finished. She told me about one of the first doctors, Nehemiah Blackwood, Reverend Blackwood's own father, she murmured. He experimented on patients who never volunteered to be here runaway slaves, captured natives, immigrants with no families to speak for them. He wanted to study what he called the primitive mind, and he wrote everything down. The implications were terrifying. If Latoya spoke the truth, then this hospital had been built atop both literal graves and a legacy of medical abuse so profound it mocked the very Christian mercy it claimed to represent. Dr. Aldrich knew he had to verify it. Quietly, he descended into the basement archives over the next several days, combing through dust-caked ledgers and forgotten papers. What he found chilled him to the bone. Hidden among routine reports were several leather-bound journals signed by Dr. N. Blackwood. They documented treatments that even in 1847 would have been called barbaric. Blackwood had carried out unauthorized experiments on vulnerable patients, mapping so-called racial thresholds of pain, pushing the human body beyond endurance, and studying how people of different ethnic backgrounds responded to psychological torment. Worse still, he had focused on individuals who carried spiritual traditions outside Christian doctrine. I have identified several specimens who exhibit what I can only call heathen illumination. One entry read, primarily of African or native origin. These patients react to stimuli ignored by Christian minds by subjecting them to controlled de-stress. I hope to isolate the source of their unnatural sensitivities and determine whether they can be purged through proper intervention. One case obsessed him, a young woman who spoke in strange tongues and described memories no mortal should possess. His notes detailed restraints, sensory deprivation, and spiritual realignment designed to sever her link to ancestral memory. The final journal entry, dated November 15th, 1838, was damning. The girl from the woods resists every remedy. Her capacity to reach through generations grows despite all measures. I now believe she represents a form of humanity incompatible with Christian society. For the safety of the community, I recommend her permanent confinement. Aldrich stared, at the words, his stomach turning. The timelines aligned. The girl Blackwood had tried to destroy was Latoya, and yet Blackwood's failure was clear in the pages that followed. His later notes hinted at growing unrest among staff-night, hallucinations, a sense that the very walls were infected by what he had tried to crush. His second-to-last entry was the most unsettling of all. The barrier between my patient's memories and my own is dissolving. I dream of chains, of the whip of ceremonies in forgotten tongues. I no longer know where their suffering ends, and mine begins. I fear the infection is not of the body, but of the soul. Blackwood was dead by December 1838, officially of a heart attack, though his private writings suggested his mind had already unraveled. When Dr. Aldrich placed the journals before Reverend Whitmore, the minister had no choice but to face the truth. Blessed Mercy Infirmary had been founded on desecrated ground. built by hands that practiced cruelty in the name of science and faith, and haunted still by the consequences. The minister had known about the old burial site and had agreed years ago to have the remains quietly moved. But the horrifying details of Dr. Blackwood's experiments were new to him. Learning that the institution he served had been built not only on physical graves, but on cruelty and hidden torture, shook his faith in everything he believed his mission stood for. "We must make this right," Reverend Whitmore said at last. His voice weighted with remorse. "If this young woman has been carrying the pain of these injustices for nearly 10 years, then it is our duty before God to face the truth and seek forgiveness." But just as they prepared to meet with Latoya and reveal what they had discovered, the hospital itself seemed to stir. Strange events began to ripple through the building. Patients reported vivid dreams, the same dreams of violent moments from the town's buried past. Staff members experienced flashes of memories they knew were not their own. Doors opened and closed without cause. In Latoya's ward, temperatures swung from freezing to suffocating warmth. Voices whispered in languages no one recognized. Dr. Aldrich began to understand. Latoya hadn't caused this. She had awakened it. The weight of countless souls silenced on that ground was stirring at last. The breaking point came when Reverend Blackwood, haunted by his family's connection to the hospital, sought out Dr. Aldrich, his hands shaking, his voice low. "I need to tell you something about my father," he confessed, eyes hollow. "Something I've hidden for almost 30 years. He didn't die of a heart attack. He took his own life. Before he did, he told me about a girl he'd been treating. He said she showed him things about our bloodline, sins that stretched back generations. He couldn't bear to live knowing the truth of what we'd done. The admission shattered what little certainty remained. Dr. Nehemiah Blackwood hadn't simply been a cruel doctor. He had been a man crushed beneath the weight of ancestral guilt and spiritual reckoning. A reckoning Latoya had somehow drawn to the surface. The implications were staggering. Latoya's gift or curse was not limited to her own lineage. Anyone who came into contact with her risked confronting the buried sins of their own bloodlines. This was no longer about one patient's mysterious condition. Latoya was a living bridge to everything the community had tried to forget: the suffering of the oppressed, the shame of the oppressors, the unpaid debt of history. Her presence forced every soul tied to that hospital to feel the truth their ancestors had buried. And yet, one question tormented Dr. Aldrich: would confronting this history bring healing, or would it destroy them all? Latoya had already shown her power could affect minds, bodies, and even the air around them. What would happen when she was finally given the chance to speak the full truth aloud? On the morning of February 20th, 1847, Dr. Aldrich chose a path that would change the Blessed Mercy Infirmary forever. He summoned the senior staff, the local clergy, and a small number of patients who were strong enough to bear witness, gathering them in the hospital's chapel. "We have spent weeks examining this young woman through medicine and scripture," he told them. "But I fear we have been asking the wrong questions. We have tried to fix her, when perhaps, all along, we should have been listening. Latoya was brought into the chapel in a plain white gown, but the timid girl they had known was gone. In her place stood a woman with the calm gravity of someone who had walked through centuries of human sorrow. When she spoke, her voice carried a stillness that made every person in the room lean in. "I am not merely one soul," she began, each word steady. "I am a vessel of the memories your world has chosen to forget. I carry the cries of those who died unheard, the stories erased from your records, the pain buried with unmarked bones. You call this an illness. I call it my purpose." As she stepped forward, the air in the chapel shifted, warm and cold all at once, like two seasons fighting for the same space. Several people gasped, claiming they felt unseen figures pressing in around them. "This ground is sacred," Latoya continued, her tone now rhythmic, resonant. "Before you laid a single brick, my people and the people stolen, chained, and silenced honored this place as a home for the dead and the wounded. The buried their honored here, and when enslaved souls were denied a grave, they were hidden beneath this earth." Dr. Aldrich felt his disbelief crumble as he watched patients straighten in their seats, breathing easier, as though a weight had been lifted. Staff who had suffered unexplainable visions nodded, tears streaking down their faces, finally understanding what had been calling to them all along. When Dr. Nehemiah Blackwood brought me here, in 1838, Latoya began, locking eyes with Reverend Blackwood, whose face had turned pale. He believed he could sever the tie between my spirit and the voices of those who came before me. He used devices and brutal methods meant to cut away my connection to the past. But pain does not silence memory, it deepens it. Every act meant to erase who I am only added another voice to the thousands I carry within me. Her words struck the room like thunder. The realization hit the staff all at once. Latoya hadn't just been a patient, she had been a prisoner, subjected to deliberate attempts to destroy her cultural identity. Several nurses and orderlies began to cry quietly, unable to reconcile their work with the hidden cruelty of the institution's past. Latoya turned her gaze to Reverend Blackwood. "Your father," she said softly, began to understand the weight of what he had done only at the very end. "The memories I hold are not only of my own people's suffering, but of every wound this land has carried." When he looked into my eyes for the last time, he didn't just see the pain of the victims. He saw the unbearable truth of being part of that harm. That truth took him from this world. Reverend Blackwood, shaking, rose to his feet, tears carving lines down his face. "Tell me," he pleaded, his voice breaking, "what can we possibly do to make this right?" Latoya's expression softened, and for the first time since her arrival, a gentle smile crossed her face. "The first step is to name what has been done," she said. "But true healing is never passive. Those who suffered do not call for vengeance. They call to be remembered, to be honored, and to ensure their pain is never repeated." She moved toward the altar at the front of the chapel. And then the impossible began to unfold. The patients, once silent, fearful, or delirious, began to speak, not in their own voices, but in the voices of others. Mrs. Hitchcock, who had bonded so deeply with Latoya, began to list name after name of people buried on the hospital grounds with no marker, no prayer, no acknowledgement. Young Timothy Wadsworth, once labeled possessed, stood and described with eerie precision the original sacred burial grounds beneath the building, complete with a location of ceremonial objects long lost. One by one, patients spoke histories that had been buried with the bodies, families torn apart by slavery, children who had died nameless, rituals forbidden, languages silenced, and songs erased. Dr. Aldrich could barely breathe as he realized what he was witnessing. This was not madness. This was testimony. Latoya had somehow opened a door through which the dead could speak, using the living as their voice. "You call this a place of healing," Latoya said, turning to the doctors and nurses. "But how can true healing take root on soil soaked in unacknowledged grief? Every soul who walks through these halls carries not just their own suffering, but the weight of generations. Until you face that, you treat only the wound you can see, never the one beneath." From the far side of the chapel, Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the hospital's eldest physician, stepped forward slowly, his face pale with awe. "I have practiced medicine for 40 years, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. "I've watched patients survive when they shouldn't, and die when they had every chance to live. I never understood why some seemed to carry burdens too heavy for one lifetime. Are you telling us that illness isn't only of the body, but of the blood, of the history that lives within us?" "Yes," Latoya replied firmly. "Your science pretends the past is gone, but it isn't. The dead live in us. Their pain becomes ours. Their unfinished stories shape our lives. Only by naming their suffering, honoring their journeys, and learning from their experiences can we hope to be whole." At that moment, Sister Mary Catherine stepped forward, her voice quiet but sure. "In my faith, we speak of the communion of saints, the belief that the dead remain with us through love that never dies. What you describe feels like a deeper truth of the same mystery. These spirits aren't separate from us. They are threads in the fabric of our shared humanity." Latoya nodded. "Exactly. But such a gift comes with weight. Those like mythos who carry the memories are bridges between worlds. We remind the living of what has been forgotten and offer the dead the peace they have been denied." The chapel was filled with a strange stillness, a quiet that hummed with unseen presence. Even the air felt different, lighter, clearer, as if centuries of sorrow had begun to lift. And just when it seemed the story could hold no more, Latoya reached into the folds of her white dress and drew out a small brass locket, the only thing she had brought with her to the hospital. She opened it, revealing not a photograph nor a keepsake, but a pinch of dark soil. "This earth," she said, placing it gently on the altar, comes from every sacred place where my people were buried or abandoned. It carries the weight of pain, but also the wisdom born from it. Let it stay here as a promiser, reminder of what silence costs and what truth can heal. The room held its breath. The story of Blessed Mercy Infirmary had changed forever. As long as this stays here, in a place of respect, Latoya said softly, setting the locket on the altar, this hospital will remember what it truly stands for, not only to heal broken bodies, but to tend to the wounds that stretch across time and generations. Dr. Aldrich felt warm tears rolling down his face as the enormity of what had taken place sank in. Latoya wasn't some troubled patient with a rare psychological disorder. She was a living vessel of collective suffering, a keeper of memories too long buried, carrying them until the right hands could help her set them free. "Will we ever see you again?" he asked quietly. Latoya gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "You'll see me in every person who suffers from pain they can't name," she said. "In families who carry burdens handed down like shadows. In whole communities aching from old wounds they never caused. My work continues. Wherever someone dares to listen to the voices of the past." As her words settled over the chapel, a strange and wondrous calm swept through the room. One by one, the patients who had spoken in voices not their own began to return to themselves. Yet they didn't forget what had happened. They remembered everything. More than that, they described a lightness, as though invisible chains had fallen away. Mrs. Hitchcock would later tell anyone who'd listen that it was the most profound spiritual experience of my entire life. Her pneumonia, untouchable by medicine, vanished completely in the days that followed. Young Timothy Wadsworth, once thought hopelessly mad, never again suffered the terrifying fits that had tormented him. Instead, he developed a quiet gift, an uncanny ability to sense grief in others and comfort them in ways no doctor ever could. And the greatest change of all took root in Dr. Aldrich himself. What he had witnessed in that chapel rewrote everything he thought he knew about medicine, suffering, and the human soul. He began to experiment with approaches that looked beyond symptoms and into the deep wounds of the heart and spirit, practices that would later influence the beginnings of what the world would call holistic care. In the weeks after that gathering, the Blessed Mercy Infirmary seemed almost reborn. The walls seemed to breathe easier. The heavy air that had clung to the place for decades lifted. Patients healed faster. Staff found new purpose. The tense, oppressive atmosphere that had haunted the wards gave way to peace. But not everyone welcomed what had happened. Dr. Aldrich kept meticulous notes, recording every detail, not only as a medical record, but as a testimony of history. Soon, however, the outside world began to take notice. Within days, Reverend Whitmore received visits from town officials, church leaders, even the mayor of Millbrook himself. Rumors had spread, patients speaking in unknown tongues, strange ceremonies, unsettling truths about the hospital's buried past. We cannot allow this institution to fall into disgrace with talk of spirits and superstitions, Mayor Blackwell barked during a tense emergency meeting. Our city's reputation rests on its Christian virtue and proper conduct. Dr. Aldrich stood at an impossible crossroads. The evidence of healing was undeniable. People had recovered from illnesses no medicine had ever cured. The hospital itself had transformed. Yet explaining how it happened would demand admitting things that threatened both scientific pride and religious power. The pressure only grew. Families of past patients began asking hard questions. Old journals from Dr. Nehemiah Blackwood had prefaced revealing years of hidden abuse, crimes that could have brought scandal and trials had he still been alive. The leadership faced ruin if the full story became public. It was Latoya who gave them a way forward. 6 weeks after her arrival, on a grey morning in late February, she asked Dr. Aldrich to meet her privately. He found her quietly folding her few belongings. "It's time for me to go," she said calmly. "My work here is done. If I stay, I'll only bring trouble to your door." Aldrich argued. He insisted she deserved care, safety, even restitution for the pain she had endured. But Latoya only smiled gently. "The healing that needed to happen has already happened," she told him. "The spirits have been heard. The truth has been spoken. Those who were ready to receive it did. Forcing others to believe what they fear would only turn them away and undo all we've achieved." She handed him a letter addressed to the hospital board. It released them from any further obligation for her care, asked that her records be sealed, and gave careful instructions for honoring the sacred ground beneath the infirmary. It even offered new guidance on treating illness by tending to both the mind and the soul. "And now?" Aldrich asked, though in his heart he already knew the answer. Latoya's eyes softened. "Now," she said, "I go where the dead are still, waiting to speak to the places where history hides its wounds, where communities are still haunted by what they were never allowed to grieve. My work is to help them remember, so they can finally begin to heal." The gift Latoya carried was never meant to be hers alone. It belonged to everyone willing to serve as a bridge between the living and the unseen. On the morning of March 1st, 1847, Latoya vanished without a trace. The night nurse had checked on her at midnight. She was resting peacefully. But when the morning shift arrived, her bed was empty. Her few belongings were gone. There were no signs of how she had left the infirmary. Only one thing remained: her brass locket, still resting on the chapel altar where she had placed it days before. In the months that followed, Dr. Aldrich quietly reshaped the entire institution, based on what Latoya had revealed. New care protocols were introduced, ones that focused on understanding each patient's family background and cultural roots. He formed support groups for what he began calling inherited trauma, blending medical treatment with psychological and spiritual care. Together with Reverend Whitmore, he established a memorial garden for those who had been buried without acknowledgement, each marker bearing names spoken during that night in the chapel. The results were undeniable. Patients improved faster, staff stayed longer, and the hospital developed a reputation for treating the whole person, not just the symptoms. But publicly, the story was rewritten. Official records described Latoya as a patient suffering from a dissociative condition who simply responded well to therapy and peer support. The Sacred Chapel gathering was recorded as a group therapy experiment. It kept politicians quiet and the hospital safe from scrutiny, while the real truth was carefully hidden in Dr. Aldrich's private journals. The ministers who had witnessed those events were never the same. Reverend Blackwood researched his family's history and started a fund to educate children from families scarred by slavery. Reverend Marsh began preaching about how the sins of the past echo into modern families. Reverend Whitmore became a passionate voice for integrative healing, teaching that medicine should never ignore the soul. The patients who had stood in that chapel carried the memory with them forever. Many developed a strange sensitivity to the pain of others, often becoming quiet healers in their own communities, helping people untangle deep wounds they didn't even know they carried. Dr. Aldrich practiced medicine for another 3 decades, but never again the way he had before. He became a pioneer of what would later be called holistic medicine, treating the person, not just the disease. And he wasn't the only one. A handful of physicians trained under him reported seeing other patients with gifts eerily similar to Latoya's, individuals able to sense buried trauma, speak forgotten truths, and awaken those around them to the weight of their past. By 1877, scattered reports from multiple states told of a young woman, always in her 20s, always of mixed ancestry, speaking in unknown languages, capable of unlocking ancestral memories. Whether this was Latoya herself or others like her, no one could say. Dr. Aldrich died in 1889, still unsure whether these women were individuals, a shared consciousness, or something beyond human understanding. His final journal entry concluded, simply, what we saw in 1847 was not a strange accident, but a glimpse into the deeper reality of human life. We are not separate. We are threads in one endless web, carrying the joys and wounds of those who came before us. Some among us are born to remember, to heal what entire generations have chosen to forget. The brass locket remained on the altar until the hospital was torn down in 1923. When the rubble was cleared, it was gone, never catalogued, never found. Some whispered it had been taken by someone who knew its meaning. Others believed it had returned to the earth, its duty completed. Today, the land is just a quiet park. Most visitors have no idea of the extraordinary events that took place there. But some claim the area still feels different, calmer, almost as if the ground itself remembers, still holding the echo of a night when the past was finally allowed to speak. Latoya's story forces us to ask questions we're not comfortable asking. Do some people really carry the memories of those who came before? Or is there a scientific explanation we've yet to discover? Whatever the answer, the fact remains. Every person touched by her presence walked away changed. They saw healing differently. They saw humanity differently. Perhaps that is the most terrifying part of all, that true healing requires facing the wounds we try hardest to bury. That progress is impossible without turning to face the ghosts in our collective past. And that sometimes the dead don't stay silent. They speak through us, urging us to remember. So what do you think about the events that unfolded at Blessed Mercy Infirmary in 1847? Are Latoya's gifts proof of something beyond our understanding? Or do you see a more earthly explanation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story gave you chills, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more dark histories and hidden truths from the past that refuse to stay buried. Until next time, take care, keep questioning, and remember, the scariest stories are the ones that might just be true. See you in the next video.